Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Safe House, brought to you by the Safe House Initiative. I'm Jeff Edwards, co chair of the Safe House Initiative, and your host for today's podcast. In recent episodes, we've been exploring the need for a federal cyber enterprise, basically an integrated public private approach to cybersecurity for our nation. This episode, we are really fortunate to be joined by Craig Bowman, who is the VP at Trellix and also the creator and driving force behind founding of the Redwood Project. Craig, welcome to the Safe House.
Thanks very much. Appreciate being here.
Hey, it's your first time. Why don't you introduce yourself and get acquainted with the audience? A little bit about your background, how your journey ended up to where you are today.
Yeah, you bet. So thanks for having me. And I'll see my
Oh yeah,
journey.
oh yeah.
Wow, started a long time ago, I guess. I'll try to make it really fast so we don't bore people. But right out of college, I never expected that I would be kind of where I am today. I was a
Mm,
business major, but was really into computers, and so was approached by a company that ended up being a company that was working with the intelligence community
mm,
and asked me to join them. So I ended up working with the intelligence community for years on both an offensive and defensive role.
mm.
And if you go out to LinkedIn, it'll just say Department of Defense because they prefer it that way. And then, and then for 8 years did that. Started a couple companies on my own, doing work back to the government. And then after that, September 11th happened. They called me back, did some more work for them before I then broke off and said, "Hey, I'm going to go do cyber as a sort of like industry focus, I guess." And so I joined Adobe and joined as their national director for cyber and for security,
Yeah.
and then on to Verizon, where I ran all of their public sector. Did a couple startups, one out of Canada, one out of the coast, West Coast, and found myself at VMware for a few years, and then wound up here at Trellix, which is the old McAfee FireEye Mandiant
Oh,
combination.
right. Yep.
Right. So that's what Trellix is. It's not a medical company. It's actually a cyber company.
Nice. So, so along the way, you saw a need, and it had to be filled, and that sort of what caused you to help found the Redwood Project. Is that correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah. So I was called out to speak at a private conference out in Portland, Oregon. And after I gave my speech, I was the keynote or whatever. I sat down and there was this gentleman next to me, and he asked me the question. He said, "I liked your speech. What would you change to make things better in the United States? You say
Yeah.
that we've got a lot of challenges." And I said that one of the biggest gaps that I saw was that after the Edward Snowden leak of information,
Yeah.
there was a general pullback from the industry to being able and willing to collaborate with the US government to help them in the national security needs. And we had to find a way back to finding that public private partnership where the federal government could leverage the power of commercial industry, and that the commercial industry could feel safe about providing resources to the federal government on behalf of the United States. If we could get back to pre Edward Snowden, that we'd be in a much better position for the future of cyber attacks. And that led to this gentleman, Bob Kingery, inviting me and others out to the West Coast to spend a weekend in the Redwood Forest to collaborate and to find a way to do that. And that's how the Redwood Project got formed.
That's fascinating. So how are you going about this in terms of trying to rustle in legislative agendas, and especially in the current environment where there's a lot of cuts that have been going on? What's your take on it now? Just curious, and how you approaching it?
Well, so I would like to say that we are the facilitators of conversation. We are not the
Okay.
dictators of the policy and or the direction. The Redwood Project, and by the way, for your listeners, you can go to redwoodproject.us and you can see the website. The Redwood Project is a nonprofit initiative, and so we are, as I mentioned, strategically positioned to support the country's evolving vision for national security. And while we started over a year and a half ago, It doesn't matter who the administration is or who the president is. We are nonpartisan, and we have members of both parties coming to our events. We don't talk politics, we talk cyber. And so when you go out to the website, you're going to find that the Redwood Project has a couple initiatives that we started. Those were started by the members. And so the very first meeting in the Redwood Forest, we actually met at a cabin where Oppenheimer and the Manhattan Project started their journey as well. And so it was very historical for us to start it in the same cabin. And we threw it out to the members to say, if we're going to reinvent the way industry works with government, what would that look like? And so they came up with about 15 work streams. And then we voted on which work streams would have the biggest impact to the United States. And it evolved into the 5 that are published on our website. And so those 5, and I'll just kind of go through them briefly. One was to expand what's called the Special Government Employee Program. And that is a program that grants citizens a top secret clearance and access to the White House to be able to give and to collect information on things that are sensitive to the U.S. interest. It is a very special relationship that is extended from the government to non-security or intelligence community members. So that was the first work stream. The second work stream, and by the way, the reason why that one was formed is that the industry said that all of the contributions they give back to the government, they never hear what happens as a result of their advice or their information. And so to close the loop on communication, the SGE program was brought in as a work stream. The second work stream was to create a proactive strategy, and this is very proactive, to disrupt cyber adversaries from targeting our industry leaders' interests. And so that proactive strategy would be a collaboration with government and with private partners and with cybersecurity experts. And so that was a very proactive as opposed to reactive work stream.
Yeah.
The third work stream is what we called Operation Dynamo, which was named after the Dunkirk, when England sent the boats out to rescue the troops at Dunkirk. And that was a voluntary partnership. So this work stream is a voluntary partnership for businesses to collaborate with government entities and to share intelligence and kind of bolster collective defense.
Got it.
Work stream 4 was we wanted to introduce legal protections under safe harbor so that when we collaborate with the government, that we don't have to fear legal liability, because that's one of the biggest concerns from industry was, if we share information, is this going to be used against us? And then the last work stream was to provide cybersecurity support to smaller companies to help strengthen their entire cyber chain resiliency. So it's great that the big CISOs that came to the Redwood Project that are Fortune 100 companies can have, it can interface with the federal government. But what about the smaller or supply chain organizations that don't have that influence and don't have that connection? And how do we help them? So those were the 5 work streams. And so from there, we, over the last year and a half, we created the nonprofit. We created some papers around the safe harbor provisions, and we got it in front of the previous administration. They found it incredibly interesting, but right as we were finishing sort of that collaboration, the new administration came on. And so now we're re-engaging with this administration about the Redwood Project's mission, if that helps. I hope it helps.
Yeah. And with the current administration, I think that that the way you're looking at the world, of a better collaboration between private and public is probably being received very well, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think, for the listeners, it's hard to put into like a work stream or into a timeline the changes that are occurring under the current administration.
Yeah.
And I'll try to do the best job I can. And by all means, if you're listeners, if I missed something, shoot me a note, either on LinkedIn. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at WC Bowman Craig. And then you can drop me a note. I'll add it to my knowledge base, I guess. But I think a general theme of this administration is deregulation.
Yeah.
I'll just, deregulation, deregulation, deregulation.
Yep.
And the reversal, I think, of previous administrations' reliance on federal oversight. So, if we just start all the way back to January and we kind of roll the tape, January 20th, the Trump administration rolls out an executive order on unleashing American energy. And I know this is focused on energy, but I'm going to kind of tell a story here about your listeners. If they understand the theme, they can kind of understand that this administration has a very specific target, and they do have they're articulating what they want to do. And it's only when you really look at the details that you can see it's pretty clear. So he
Yep.
rolls out the Unleashing American Energy. And so this basically repeals a lot of the environmental regulation that indirectly affects infrastructure development. And so that's the very first sort of like sign that we're going to get out of the infrastructure development and we're going to deregulate. In January, he starts to dismantle the Cyber Safety Review Board, the
Yep.
CSRB, and
Yep.
he starts asking people to resign. So this is sort of federal oversight, federal regulation on cyber policy on the states. So he starts dismantling and reevaluating the CSRB. Then in February, he has his first major memorandum, which is the America First investment policy. Now, that is mostly focused on artificial intelligence, but woven through there, if you look closely, he's got standards for cyber infrastructure relating to AI.
Okay.
And
Yes.
so that he's starting to telegraph that, hey, automation is going to take a prominent role in cyber.
Yep.
We're deregulating, we're getting out of the infrastructure business, we're starting to focus on AI. And so right after that, right about that same time period, a couple things happen, which are not formal kind of releases. The first is the administration issues a RFI for the AI action plan. And so that covers hardware, data centers, privacy, security, technical standards. So that RFI drops. Then JD Vance comes out, our vice president comes out, and he starts outlining AI policy, kind of setting the stage for we're going to be a leader in AI.
Yep.
And so all throughout February, there's tons of focus on AI tools, application frameworks, focusing on countries like China, making sure they don't get technology we have. So now you can start to see this sort of like thought process formulate around AI and deregulation and infrastructure. Then you've got NIST, right? So NIST comes out with
Yep.
their AI cybersecurity policy, and this is early in the year, and they ask for the cyber AI profile concept paper. So that is, this is not by just, by just coincidence, right? NIST is sort of seeing this is the main focus of the White House. And so that takes us on into late February and into March. And by the
Yep.
way, we're only talking about a lot of this has happened like in 4 months.
Yeah, it's
I mean,
amazing,
this
isn't
is
it?
like
Yeah.
crazy. This is like I mean, this is like everything I just said is just up to February,
Yeah.
right? So
Well,
then
yeah.
we get to March, and then boom, right? Then the shoe drops. So
Yep.
the executive order comes out March 19th. If you haven't read it and you're a listener and you care about cyber, you better go back and read it because it is not a formal cyber executive order, but it's called Achieving Efficiency Through State and Local Preparedness. And so a lot of the people in cyber didn't read it because it didn't look like cyber. It wasn't the 14028, right? Biden executive order. It's this obscure Achieving Efficiency Through State and Local Preparedness. And basically, that basically says, hey, the federal government is getting out of maintaining a cyber policy on behalf of the states.
Yep.
So in there, it says we're deregulating cyber. It's going to be up to the state governments to worry about their emergency relief and their cyber policy. And in there, it says there's going to be a national resiliency strategy. And that's going to, one of the assistants to the NSA is going to produce this strategy.
Yep.
But it does aim to sort of change the game to say, hey, the states, you don't have to go from an all risk kind of all hazard approach like that Biden kind of put forward. It's saying, hey, you're going to be able to adapt to risk-based approach for your state, for your industry, for your critical infrastructure. And we assume that's where the grants and the funding is going to be allocated for the federal government. And so
Got it. Got it.
that executive order is sort of his vision of deregulating, so CISA and all of the federal government, they're not going away, but they're really going to be focused on protecting the federal government's infrastructure. And he's saying, state and local, you are kind of sovereign organizations. You tell us what your needs are.
Yeah.
And here's the critical infrastructure that we have to protect. And so we're going to give you some guidance from the overall strategy and resilience strategy, and CISA is going to help coordinate that, but your states are going to tell us what your risk is. And then we'll figure out how to fund it, from there. And then, later in March, then FedRAMP comes out and it says, yeah, and we're going to get out of your way as well, right? We're going to go from years and months to weeks of approval by just getting rid of all this red tape and documentation that we required under FedRAMP. And that happened in late March. So in 4 or 5 months, cybersecurity in this country has been completely changed.
Yeah.
In everything that's happened. And this is just in 4 months. It's crazy. It's crazy. Years changed in 4 months.
Yeah, but the vision, I think, of the Redwood Project, this may work well because you have some ideas. When I was talking to Alex Green, one of your associates, a few episodes ago from the Redwood Project, we talked about the ISACs is an infrastructure that's already there, about information sharing. That's part of the reasons why the Redwood Project was formed, right? Is to help facilitate an easier way of sharing information and then enacting upon that. Is that correct? And how do you see the ISACs fitting into the mix here?
Yeah, I think they're critical. So for those of you that's listening, if you don't know what the ISACs are, it's the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers. So they were stood up, 2003, I think was when the council was stood up. But when they were stood up, they're basically critical infrastructure, information sharing organizations. So there's more than just critical. So in the United States, there are 16 critical infrastructure sectors. They include chemical, commercial, financial, energy sector, government, food and agriculture, healthcare. I mean, it goes on and on and on, right? In the ISACs, there's about 28. So there's more than just critical infrastructure. So there's non-critical industries that have stood up their ISACs. So this is like media and entertainment. There's research and education, there's space and others that don't fall into critical infrastructure.
Okay.
But they are collective threat sharing member organizations that allow collaboration within their industry. And so the strengths of them are that they unify the industries in which they are, in which they represent. The sort of the downside is that it's hit or miss whether or not they're really effective.
Huh.
So, the financial one, I mean, there's some that are really powerful and well designed, the financial and, I mean, the financial is the biggest one, obviously, and healthcare is also a big one. And so I think that when you look at them, they're going to be critical in the future of what this administration, wants to do. And so as we looked at just the last 5 months, we began to pivot our original papers that we were putting in front of the previous administration to say, hey, we kind of like the way this administration is moving with deregulation. And if we could get the ISACs to be a critical part of that, then what would it take for us to make all of this jive together into a cohesive strategy? And that's where we came up with an industry-led National Cybersecurity Council. And that would be used kind of like the ISAC Council that tries to unify the ISACs.
Okay.
But we would be coordinating cross-industry threat sharing, and we would kind of act as a central hub back to that federal government where we could do the special government employees to get information that we could share, that we could help them with, hey, this is what we're seeing in the industry, and work with Cyber Command and whatever CISA's role ends up being in the future to create a predictive defense exchange, right? And that's a real-time machine readable threat exchange that could maybe be used for the artificial intelligence engine that this administration wants to build. And so that's what we've kind of like put forward now as our answer to the changes that this administration has made over the last 4 years.
So this could be a quick way to accomplish this new way forward for the country.
It could be. I think that what has been missing from a lot of the conversation is enforceability. So
Uh,
what we heard from industry, this is not me, this is the CISOs of the companies that are part of the Redwood Project. What they said was, we share information and we don't get protected with the federal dollars we're giving and the information that we're sharing. We still get hacked.
yeah,
Right? We're still getting hit by China and North Korea and Russia. And so if this were a physical attack, if this were a kinetic attack,
yeah,
the federal government would step in and it would be massive response. If they crossed our border with tanks, instant response.
yeah.
When they cross our border with cyber attacks, we have very strong words that we use towards them, right? so
Sticks and
the way,
stones.
yeah, I mean, so we don't even see what the federal government does. We don't know what they do on our behalf. There's where the special government employee comes in. B, worst thing that happens is we get sued or we get fined by the federal government.
Right.
We end up getting, hey, you guys didn't protect citizens well enough. Well, it's a little disingenuous for previous administrations to blame the industries that are paying them to protect them. We pay federal tax dollars to protect our industries, and when they don't protect us, they then fine us for not protecting ourselves.
Yeah.
So there was the birth of the Redwood Project, was let's figure out a better way of doing this. And so if the NCC were to be stood up, this would be a huge win for this administration, because what they could do is, instead of giving money for everybody to do cyber, what they could say is, hey, we'll give you a tax incentive. Right? The ISACs established the baseline for good, better, and best security. And if you meet these thresholds developed by your own industry partners, we will give you a tax incentive. There's the carrot.
Yeah.
So you don't have to take it out of the federal budget to pay for it. You can give tax incentives, which is just as valuable to these companies, for establishing their own frameworks that matter to them, that they know best anyway. They're going to adapt faster to frameworks that they know work. And yes, the federal government will have some collaboration and cyber command, and that's the point of the Redwood Project, is that we're working together, but it's led by industry. It's led by people closest to the problem. I mean, that is a win-win for the way this administration has been establishing themselves in the last 4 months.
So you mentioned something about the small, mid-sized businesses and their critical role in all this. Would there be a special focus on trying to make their voices heard also and participate? Because with tax incentives, that would kind of democratize the participation in some form or fashion.
Yeah. So with the ISACs today, there is a kind of pay-to-play. With some of the ISACs, you put money in and you get something out. Small businesses, rural communities, they might not have the money, right, to contribute to an ISAC. So the ISACs would be stood up as sort of like membership programs, where if you're under a certain threshold, you don't have to pay. By the way, the Redwood Project right now is a nonprofit. We don't charge for people attending our meetings. It's invite only. But for the small, medium businesses, there are statewide cybersecurity grant programs already in place. Some of them are coming up for renewal at the end of this year, and we don't know what this administration is going to do for the state, grant program. We're going to be going to the administration and saying, these are important. These grant programs are important, and this NCC can help the states figure out, the direction that the states need to go to receive that funding.
Yeah.
And then the rural organizations, right? There are small business cybersecurity protection grants, which offer today up to $100,000 of, for foundational cybersecurity measures that, follow kind of the top 20 under CIS. So All of those things need to be continually funded by the administration, and then they need to be woven into this deregulated strategy
Yeah.
that is being led by industry. And right now, I think the NCC that the Redwood Project is sort of recommending would be a great way to help the administration realize where, by industry, by critical industry and beyond, the money is needed the most. And that's where our federal dollars as citizens should go, is to the people that know best where they need it.
Yeah, so the NCC would be the first time ever to have a real view from the top to allocate resources and take advantage of what's already been deployed, like the ISACs are in place, and to make sense of it all and rationalize it, and then make it equitable across reasonably so, based upon the needs of the various states and or enterprises that exist throughout the country.
Yeah, so it's taking the place of, well, not taking the place of, but it's augmenting the existence of CISA, because CISA has been dramatically changed in the last 4 months. The
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, they've refocused CISA, and the administration made clear they're directing CISA to concentrate on their core mission, and that is defending federal networks. Now, they are to enhance the security and resilience of critical infrastructure, but they're going back to basics. So they've eliminated, for instance, the disinformation, misinformation kind of programs within this. So that was kind of an obvious. They're shifting to state and local engagement, and so to my understanding, they've terminated the $10 million annual cooperative agreement with the Center for Internet Security, and they're funding the funding of the multi-state information, the MS ISAC and the election ISAC. They've defunded those two, or they stopped funding those because they say they no longer kind of like focus on what CISA is supposed to be responsible for. So if you look at those three right there, and then you look at the budget cut, right? They were cut $500 million of their $3 billion budget has been cut. So
Yep.
they're not funding the multi-state ISAC. They're not funding the election ISAC. They're defunding part of CISA, and they're saying get back to protecting federal government.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, the NCC could be that direct liaison, but led by the states and led by industry,
Yep.
which is what it sounds like this administration wants to do.
And fundamentally aligns with your vision.
It does. It does. I think that if we're going to get industry to share with
Yeah.
government post, Edward Dum Dum, then
Yep.
I think that the only way to do that is to have it led by industry, but with strong government sort of advisory, where before it was all led by government
Yeah.
and the industry was giving everything and getting nothing back. And this way, what the industry is going to get is direct tax incentives
Yep.
by doing the things that's important to the federal government. And man, if we look at the way this administration is being run, is that not the way this guy's running the country?
Yeah.
He's saying this is what's important, and we will take money away or we will give money if you don't agree. If you decide that you're going to do your own thing, there's going to be a financial impact. And
Yeah.
so by going to industry and saying, hey, tell us what is critically important, and if we agree, we're going to give you that incentive to do it, it aligns perfectly with his vision.
Yeah, everything's streamlined and everything's much more functional, and no eliminate the overlaps that exist now or the voids that are out there.
Yeah, and listen, for listeners, if you love this administration or you don't like this administration, it is irrelevant. This is the administration. This is the focus of the country.
Yeah.
This is our country. This is our cyber footprint. You don't have to agree with the strategy, but you have to figure out a way to make it work as efficiently as possible for this country.
For this
And
country.
so on both sides of the spectrum, right? If people listening to this think they understand my political view, they don't. My political view is the United States of America, and whatever
Yeah.
this administration is going to do, I'm going to figure out the best way to secure this country, and so are every single member of the Redwood Project.
Yeah, this is the NCC would be independent of any administration politics. It would be a functional way of executing a very streamlined and very sensible approach that is an integrated protective layer that would be enjoyed by not by just the government, but by the entities, the commercial entities.
100%.
I always ask my guests if there's one thing that they could do to make their world a bit more secure, what would your recommendation be
All right. So
to
let's
do
start.
today? Yeah.
Let me start from personal and work my way out. So I am a youth group leader, have been for 20 some years. I am really, devoted to making sure young people are secure online. And I give podcasts and I give speeches everywhere. So I would say this to every listener: if you have kids, from the very earliest age, you need to make sure that you are in control of every bit of their data and every bit of their devices that you give them. There is no privacy with your kids, period, end of story.
Yeah.
Until they leave your house and they're paying the bills, never make the mistake of thinking that they have privacy. I'm old school about that, but I can tell you nightmare stories myself personally with my kids and people trying to get to my kids. Be in control, monitor your kids, take their devices and look at what they're doing and be active. By the time they turn 14 or 15, if you haven't done it, it can be really hard to pull it back. You're going to get a lot of resistance. There's from a parent's perspective.
That's brilliant.
As we move up the chain, I would say small and medium businesses, you're going to be looking to consolidate into unified platforms because it's going to be easier. You don't have the personnel
Yeah.
in order to manage it. You're not going to be able to attract top talent if you don't have huge budgets. So you're going to want to outsource to manage security, to online security services, ones that it may not be the best in breed, but it's going to have to be good enough. And then the more complex your environment, you start to move into sort of the, hey, I can't go to one online service. And so as you do that, try to figure out a way to get a managed service to do your 24/7, overnight, weekend monitoring for your tier 1 and tier 2 kind of alerts. And then you can have your specialized team to handle and triage on site.
Yeah.
And as you get to really complex environments, obviously, what I would say is, look for the frameworks that I think are really strong. I think, the MITRE framework is a great, I mean, it sounds cliche, but I like it. I like what they've done with it. I also like Zero Trust framework. I think it's great. CNNC. I think, there are frameworks out there which help guide us. And so I think, those are things that we as an industry, we've done. And I think that they're strong frameworks to continue.
So Craig, it's really appreciate you coming to share with us what your vision is with the Redwood Project, and hope you come back and share your progress as you update us later in the fall.
Thanks so much. And thanks for the time.
Craig, hey, and thank you so much for your insights. And I think you're going to help a lot of people think through this and clear the fog, basically, and do things and not be frozen. Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, you bet.
That's our podcast for today. I'm Jeff Edwards for the Safe House Initiative. Thanks for joining us, and remember, be safe, be resilient, and be kind to each other. For more information about the Safe House Initiative, please use your mobile device to scan the QR code on the screen, or send us an email at info@safehouseinitiative.org, or visit us on our website, safehouseinitiative.org. We look forward to hearing from you.